Hello guys, you're listening to Airsick Hydra, and today's video is going to be a feedback video primarily for the developers, but it's also going to be an opportunity for you guys to share your thoughts with me down in the comments below. So the topic for today's feedback is going to be primarily around the fantasy of Inquisitor Martyr. That is to say, the roleplay element to it, and the elements within the game that are currently incongruent with that feeling. Now, we'll come back to defining that in a moment, but just a small disclaimer, this is not a review. This is not even negative criticism. This is feedback. This is me simply saying what I feel could be improved in order to make the game better, and the reason I do this is because so many changes have happened in the past 6 months based from player feedback that I feel if you're ever going to give feedback for a game, it should be this one. The developers will communicate back with you, they will look into your ideas, and they will consider implementing them if they can. So guys, without any further ado, remember to like, remember to subscribe, and remember, we're nearly at 1,000 subs, so I need to figure out some way to sort of celebrate when we do that, but so feel free to give me some ideas for that too down in the comments below. So let's return back to the core subject of fantasy within Inquisitor Martyr, and by the fantasy I mean the roleplay element that we are undergoing. The game has a sort of an art, a vibe, a language. The game speaks to you and tells a story about a sort of a setting, a universe that you're set in. I think the best way to normally define this within a game is obviously the first few moments, but as we don't have the tutorial, the prologue, the story to go with at the moment, we really only have the opening trailer. So I just want to start off by going through that, talking to you about what sort of sense, what sort of universe the game is going to portray, and then I'm going to go through the game and talk about actual mechanical features within the game that I feel aren't particularly congruent with what the game's trying to portray. So let's crack open the trailer, see what's going on. So straight away it's telling us we're playing a dark game. It's a serious game, you can tell by our posture. You can look at our armour and tell that we are someone important, we are badass, we are stern. Now you can tell we're also balding, but we have facial tattoos and we look serious as heck. We are badass. We're not scared. You can tell by the way we stand. We've got weight, we've got purpose, we've got a big ass fucking hammer, and we can twist it and make it turn into lightning. That is awesome.
We shall fear nothing, for we are what you fear.
Now I let the guy finish his sentence there because that is so important. That seems to be fairly integral. That is the lasting memory from that sequence. We are the thing that the enemy should be scared of. And what I'd like to do now is contrast that with this. So 5 minutes into the game when you've played a little bit, at the moment, now I say again at the moment because we are missing a lot of elements within the game, well, straight away there seems to be some sounds within the game that don't seem particularly congruent with the messages that the game is trying to deliver to us. Now obviously sound is still being implemented, it's not finished yet. But I do think some of the weapons certainly sound more congruent and some of them sound less congruent with the sort of atmosphere this game is trying to portray. Within that open trailer we've got a very dark, grim, weighted, heavy feeling to the game. Lots of dark and sort of neutral colours. And suddenly we've got these weapons that sound a little bit more like toys. Not all of them, and we have seen some great improvements through the past sort of few weeks. The autogun in particular used to sound like you were shaking a box of rocks. That's improved a little bit now, but I do still feel weapons like the plasma gun and a few others still lack a little bit of weight and oomph, especially considering some of us that have played the tabletop. The plasma gun to us is an important gun. It's not a NAF gun, it's important. Even a plasma pistol, that is a weapon where you fire it, there is an element of danger there, because heck, it might even blow up in your face. That's what we're used to. We're used to this sort of punch that we expect this weapon to give. And for some of these weapons, the level of punch that's being delivered, via sound, perhaps even via visuals as well, isn't quite there yet. Now, I think it's also worth putting this into perspective though, if we're going to be comparing this to other games, that we're playing an aerial view. So the sound, the pitch, the bass is going to be different because we are up in the sky. You can't really have first person or even third person acoustics in an aerial view game because it would just sound really sort of messed up to your head. the amount of gunshots going off around you. You'll notice the enemies, when they're firing auto guns, sound quite light and flimsy. Dack, 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 dack. Sound a bit more like staplers. That maybe is not such a bad thing, because it may be a little bit overpowering when you've got 20 people shooting at you with a loud gun that's actually got a lot of bass to it. But I do think a lot of the weapons, melee included, really need some sounds that make them sound more weighted, especially weapons like the power sword. But I do feel like the animations also play a little bit of a part in this. If you compare the game of, say, sort of Space Marine or even Deathwing, when you throw a punch in that, it's slow and it's purposeful and it's heavy. And you compare that to some of the sword animations in this game, and they do look very light. Now, granted, you are wearing power armor, and the weapon, therefore, is very light, or rather very easy for you to use because you are a literal beast. However, it does lack some of the sort of oomph. Now, some of that may come with sound effects. Once you just start adding the occasional grunt to a character when they're swinging a sword around, it has a world of difference. And a heavy swing sound to a sword instead of a light swing swish makes a world of difference. But I do feel that this is one of the things for me that stops the game from feeling quite so sort of badass. I don't feel like an awesome Inquisitor necessarily when I'm listening to some of these things and looking at some of the animations. And obviously the game is still in progress, so these animations are constantly being moved and worked on, and we have seen them change quite a bit thus far. So moving on from here, away from the sort of game's aesthetics that sort of don't really feel like they're working for me, there are issues with the actual play style of the game as well. Going back to that character and we saw in the intro scene, just imagine how awesome he felt and how you would picture him in a fight. And then what I actually feel like in combat is I feel a bit like Ross Kemp when he's going on one of his traditional adventures to go and sort of visit a nearby gang. You go into a room, you see a couple of enemies, you see a sentinel in a corner, you take a bit of aggro, you think, well, things are starting to heat up, so I'll get out of there. And then you go into another room, you see a bunch of enemies, you see a trap, you think, oh, it's starting to kick off, so I'm going to get out of there. And the game teaches you to play like this. It actually, as you raise the difficulty, it teaches you to play like this. Past a certain spot where the cover system works beautifully, you take less damage, you can deal more damage, you can survive for longer. Great, the cover's good. But you go that little bit too far with the difficulty, and it actually turns not even into a kiting fest, just to a point where you've got to go in, grab aggro, walk out, group them all up and attack them, but not even keep them at kiting distance, keep them at max range, because once you're at plus 500 difficulty and you're an assassin, you die in one hit. You can still do the missions if you've got a crusader in front of you, but if anyone gets any closer than max range, you're going to die. And that's not very empowering for a player. When you're playing against a typical ARPG, even on a really hard setting, and something's going to kill you in one hit, you're still in control, you're still kiting, you know, you're in charge, and if something hits you and tags you, touches you on the bum, you know, that was your fault because you goofed. But in this is a lot more panic. There is a lot more, oh my god, don't let that near me, oh my god, don't let that near me. You're just trying to survive, and some of that may be because I'm playing an assassin, because I'm not playing particularly tanky builds. However, it is something that makes me feel not so much like a walking weapon, agent of death. I feel more like I'm petrified of anything that might potentially hurt me. And maybe that's me being a wuss, but I think some other people may get the same view as well, and they may be a little bit bored that in order to complete the difficult content, and some of us just like difficult content, in order to meet those challenges, we just have to play scared. And for me, I really feel like they have to find that sweet spot where once you go past that difficulty, you can't do it. Once you go past that difficulty where cover's no longer beneficial, then hey, you can't do the content. They need to try and sort of narrow that range, because below that sweet spot as well, you've also got that point where cover's pointless and you just walk around like a potato. And that's why 50% of the community sort of feel like it's pointless, 50% feel it's pointless, and that, I don't know, point fraction of a percent in the middle that are playing the perfect difficulty for cover feel like cover's okay. There is a majority either side though where it's either too difficult for you to bother using cover, or to easy for you to bother using cover. So either way, most people aren't using cover at the moment because of a lack of a sort of, let's say, an optimal difficulty range or incentives to give cover. Now, we'll talk more about cover another time, but I just wanted to explain to you how the combat currently doesn't really make you feel that empowered, doesn't make you feel like you're awesome. Side note here, developers, I would really like a lengthy buff, a like 3-second buff when you're in cover and you break out of it. So if you're moving between covers, you're not going to die instantly. It's fairly easy to work it into fluff. I was in cover, I'm moving to another piece of cover, and therefore I'm going to be slightly protected moving between covers. That's very easy to sort of reason with. So a small buff lasting just a couple of seconds, and maybe even the melee could make use of this too. Hey, wouldn't that be a great idea? So guys, there is one final category of sort of anti-fantasy stuff that I could have talked about, but I'm not going to. And that is the expectations of players based on previous experiences and material of Inquisitors, because I know there are people out there that feel like the mere fact that we have a currency means we're not an Inquisitor, and the fact that you have to wait for an item to be crafted because blah blah blah, somehow that makes us not an Inquisitor. There are quite a few game mechanics which people feel are perhaps anti-inquisitorial, but I'm gonna steer clear of that for the moment, because from my own personal view, game design trumps lore, and I don't feel there's anything that broken within the game that really sort of works against the lore. It is feasible for an Inquisitor to buy stuff, it's just some Inquisitors within books choose to requisition it instead. But we'll have to wait and see how the story actually works everything there. Again, I just wanted to move away from that, because it's easy to nitpick and say, well, I read this book and it said this, and I saw this article here and it told me Inquisitors actually wear brown armour or some crap like that. Let's leave that to one side perhaps. But what I would love to know, guys, is down in the comments below, what do you feel about the game? Do you feel like an Inquisitor? What at the moment doesn't work for you? Is it lighting? Is it maps? Is it enemies? Is it animations? Is it sound? Be specific. I want to know what you think. Be specific, because the developers want to know what you think. Guys, have yourself a great week. Remember to keep leaving feedback, and I'll see you in the next video. You've been listening to Essek Hydra. Remember, like and subscribe.